What happens when the most powerful diplomats in the galaxy lose their calm? Humans walk out of the negotiations, and suddenly, the entire council is thrown into chaos. Rival factions panic, and the fate of countless worlds hangs by a thread. If you want to see more epic intergalactic stories, hit subscribe and join us for the next adventure. The Galactic Council gathered inside the Great Circular Chamber, a place where thousands of decisions had shaped the future of the galaxy. But today, the atmosphere felt heavier than ever. Every seat was filled, every delegation tense, because this meeting was not just another discussion. It was the most important negotiation in years, a negotiation that would decide whether the galaxy walked toward peace or slipped into another long and terrible conflict. The kind of conflict that destroys planets, breaks alliances, and changes history forever. The members knew it, they felt it, and that pressure hung around them like a thick cloud. Representatives from powerful alien species sat in their assigned pods, their glowing symbols floating above them, showing their identity and rank. The air shimmered with different colors and energies. Voices murmured in low tones. Translators buzzed quietly. And still, there was an uneasiness that no technology could hide. Everyone knew that two huge rival blocks were on the edge of war. Their fleets were already moving, their leaders already preparing, and if this negotiation failed, nothing could stop the destruction that would follow. They had come here with hope, fear, anger, pride, and a desperation to find a solution before it was too late. In the center of the room sat the human delegation, calm, still, and focused. Humans had a strange reputation in the galaxy. They were known for two opposite qualities. They could be the gentlest diplomats or the most terrifying warriors. They were unpredictable. They were emotional at times and coldly logical at others. But one thing was clear. When humans entered a negotiation, they came with the intention to fix things, to bring peace, or to end the problem in a way that no one else had the courage or strength to do. Because of this, most species respected them, a few feared them, and almost everyone depended on them, especially today. The human representatives sat with straight posture, their eyes scanning the room, their faces serious but not stressed. They spoke in calm whispers among themselves, while other delegations argued even before the meeting officially started. Some aliens exchanged harsh glances, others avoided looking at their rivals, and a few were visibly frightened. The tension was clear on their faces, their scales, their antennas, or whatever unique features they possessed. And yet the humans remained steady, like a silent pillar in the middle of the storm. Their presence alone kept many delegates from shouting or walking out before the talks even began. Around them, security drones floated smoothly, checking for weapons, scanning emotions, and detecting any sudden rise in aggression. The Council had increased security for this particular gathering because the risk of violence was higher than usual. No one wanted an explosion, a physical attack, or a sudden incident to ruin everything. They had seen such disasters before, and the memory of those dark moments made everyone even more anxious now. The Council chairman, an ancient creature with shimmering skin and wise eyes, slowly rose to speak. The room dimmed, and the floating lights focused on the central podium. His voice echoed across the chamber, reminding everyone of why they were here. He spoke of peace, of unity, of the countless planets relying on them, of the innocent lives that would suffer if they failed. Each word carried weight, and the delegates listened with heavy hearts. But underneath his speech, there was a hidden truth everyone already knew. This negotiation was barely holding together. This meeting was the last thread between order and chaos, and if it broke, the galaxy would face consequences that would last centuries. As the chairman continued, the humans remained silent, but their expressions stayed sharp. They took in every detail, every reaction, every whisper. They understood the gravity of the situation, and they understood something else too. Many of the other species were not ready for a peaceful outcome. They were too proud, too angry, or too scared. The humans had seen this pattern many times before, and yet they still hoped for a successful negotiation because that was their role, to be the bridge, the balance, the force that kept the galaxy from destroying itself whenever tempers rose too high. The great meeting had only begun, and already the weight of it pressed on every heart. But the humans sat there prepared, steady, and determined, because they knew what was at stake. They knew that today's decisions would shape the future, and they would be ready for whatever came next, whether it was peace or the start of something much darker. The council looked toward them again and again, waiting, relying, and hoping that humanity would once again guide them through the storm. And in that silent expectation, the real story of this critical meeting began. The tension inside the chamber began to grow like a silent storm, slowly spreading from one corner of the room to another. Even before anyone officially started speaking, small arguments had already begun. Some alien delegates whispered angrily to their partners. Others tapped their claws or tails on the metal floor. Their movements sharp and impatient. The air felt heavier, as if everyone had brought their fears and frustrations and placed them in the center of the room for all to feel. It was clear that the negotiation was not going to be peaceful or smooth. Not today. The two rival blocks, whose conflict had pushed the galaxy to the edge of war, sat facing each other like ancient enemies. Their representatives avoided eye contact at first, but eventually their gazes met and sparks of hostility lit up between them. One group accused the other of betrayal. The other group accused them back with even more anger. Their voices rose. Their translator devices struggled to keep up. And all around them, delegates from smaller species watched with concern, waiting for someone to lose control and start a chain reaction that would destroy the meeting completely. Some species who had tried to stay neutral now found themselves sweating or shaking, because they knew that if the negotiation failed, their worlds would suffer too. They had no armies strong enough to survive a galaxy-wide conflict. They had no alliances powerful enough to protect them. All they could do was hope that the leaders sitting in this chamber would control their emotions and think with reason instead of pride. But as the tension grew thicker, hope began to fade from many faces. The room felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. In the middle of all this rising chaos, the human delegation sat completely silent. Their calmness was almost unnatural compared to the restless energy around them. While other species leaned forward, argued, or fidgeted, the humans simply observed, their hands resting on the table, their eyes sharp and focused. This silence made several aliens uncomfortable, because they knew humans rarely stayed quiet unless they were thinking deeply or preparing for something important. And right now, no one could guess what the humans were preparing for. Their stillness felt like a warning. A tall delegate from one of the aggressive factions suddenly stood up and slammed his hand against his table. The sound echoed through the chamber, and several species flinched. He shouted accusations across the room, claiming that his people had been disrespected, cheated, and threatened. His words carried years of bitterness. And his rage was instantly matched by another delegate from the opposing bloc, who rose to his feet and shouted back. The translator drones blinked urgently as they tried to translate the furious words being exchanged. But the shouting grew too loud, too fast, and too emotional. Some delegates tried to interrupt, raising their voices, calling for restraint, waving their arms. But no one listened. The tension burst into open confrontation. And for a moment, it felt like the chamber itself was shaking from the sheer intensity of the conflict. Security drones floated closer, ready to intervene if the situation crossed into physical violence. But they hovered uncertainly, because the Council did not want to appear forceful during such a sensitive negotiation. They needed calm, not fear. But calm was nowhere to be found now. A nervous representative from a peaceful aquatic species attempted to speak, hoping to cool the heated atmosphere, but they were immediately drowned out by louder voices. The noise in the chamber became a chaotic storm of anger, frustration, and fear. And still the humans did not move. They sat like statues, unmoved by the rising storm around them. Their eyes jumped from speaker to speaker, reading every emotion, judging every reaction, analyzing every danger. They were preparing themselves. And some delegates noticed this with dread, because when humans prepared themselves, something serious was about to happen. The council chairman rose repeatedly to call for order, but he had to compete with the shouting. His voice struggled to rise above the conflict, and each attempt only showed how weak the council's control had become in that moment. He pounded his staff on the floor, begged for silence, reminded them of the stakes, but his words barely slowed the anger spreading through the room. Alliances were breaking, friendships were cracking, and trust was vanishing minute by minute. Everything the council had tried to build felt like it was falling apart in front of their eyes. Through all the noise and chaos, one thing became clear. The situation was slipping out of control, and if something didn't change soon, the negotiation would collapse completely. The rising tension was no longer just a problem. It was a warning, a sign that the galaxy was closer to war than anyone in that room wanted to admit. And as the shouting continued, the humans exchanged a single glance among themselves, a silent conversation that only they understood. A quiet decision forming in their minds. The storm in the chamber continued to grow. But the humans were already planning their next move, knowing that the moment to act was approaching fast. The human delegation finally spoke after the long, tense silence that had filled the chamber. Their voices calm but firm, every word measured carefully, commanding attention without raising the volume. They offered a compromise, a plan that could satisfy both rival blocs without making anyone feel completely defeated. The humans explained each step slowly, pointing out the benefits and consequences. Their reasoning clear and precise. Yet simple enough for every species to understand. They did not shout. They did not demand. But their tone carried an unmistakable weight. The kind of weight that reminded everyone why humans were respected across the galaxy. The compromise proposed by the humans included adjustments that addressed both sides' most critical demands. Yet it required each faction to give up some pride. And that was the hardest part for many. The humans spoke of logic, of fairness, and of survival, pointing out that the galaxy had little room for mistakes. Their words were calm, but beneath them lay an unmistakable warning. If the council ignored reason, if the factions allowed anger to rule, the outcome would be disastrous. And everyone in the chamber understood that the humans did not bluff. Humans had a way of acting decisively when diplomacy failed, and history had shown that their warnings were never empty. Some delegates nodded slowly, seeing the wisdom in the human proposal. Their species had long respected human decision-making, while others bristled, unwilling to accept compromise. Pride and fear battled in their minds. They whispered to each other, discussing whether to accept the humans' plan or risk confrontation. And the room buzzed with tension, the air thick with uncertainty. It was a delicate balance. One small mistake could turn careful words into sparks that ignited old rivalries. And the humans were aware of this, watching every reaction with sharp eyes, reading every gesture, every twitch, every sigh. The humans continued to speak, reminding everyone of past conflicts, of the countless wars that had begun because leaders refused to listen. They spoke of lost worlds, of families torn apart, of civilizations that had vanished due to arrogance and stubbornness. Their stories were real, not exaggerations, and they struck fear and respect in equal measure as delegates listened. Many felt the weight of their own responsibilities, realizing that failure today could lead to tragedies none of them wanted to face. The humans had a way of making facts feel personal. Their words were not only logic, but a mirror reflecting the consequences of inaction. Despite the humans' calm reasoning, some delegates still refused to listen. They interrupted, accused, and challenged the plan, their voices harsh and defensive. They believed humans would not act against them, that humans would stay in the room no matter what, that their authority was untouchable. But the humans remained unmoved, their expressions serious, their calmness unbroken. They did not raise their voices, did not scold or threaten, but the silence between their words grew heavier, a quiet warning that said more than any shouting could. The delegates began to feel that this was more than a suggestion. It was a last chance. A younger delegate from a smaller species finally spoke up, agreeing with the humans, praising their logic and showing support for the compromise. This small voice created a ripple. A few more delegates nodded cautiously, but the major rival factions still resisted, arguing over details, questioning fairness, and testing patience. The humans listened patiently, countering only when necessary, always keeping the focus on the bigger picture. They reminded everyone that no personal victory was worth a galaxy in flames. The room seemed to hang on every word, the humans' quiet authority filling every corner of the chamber. Then, one human representative leaned forward slightly, speaking directly to the leaders of the two rival blocs, their voice calm but unmistakably serious. They said that ignoring this plan would have consequences no one wanted to face. They did not threaten with empty words. Their reputation spoke for itself. And the room fell silent, every delegate suddenly aware that this was not a suggestion to be dismissed lightly. The humans were giving them a clear warning. One last chance to act with reason before chaos returned. The chamber's tension shifted. A new weight settled. Not fear of words, but fear of what would happen if those words were ignored. Some delegates whispered, realizing they had underestimated the humans. Others fumed, unwilling to show weakness. But all understood the message clearly. The humans had drawn the line, and crossing it would not be simple. The compromise on the table was more than just a plan. It was a test of intelligence, courage, and wisdom. The humans were prepared to walk away if necessary, and the thought of a human delegation leaving filled the room with dread. Every species knew that if the humans stood, the galaxy had a chance. But if they walked, the consequences would be unpredictable. The quiet warning of the humans had settled over the chamber, heavy, unshakable, and unforgettable. After one particularly disrespectful outburst from a leading delegate of the opposing bloc, the humans finally reached the limit of their patience. They had listened, explained, warned, and compromised. Yet the blatant arrogance and refusal to act reasonably had pushed them to a point where words were no longer enough. The human representatives exchanged a brief, silent glance, a communication that needed no sound. And in that instant, every human in the room knew what had to happen. They were going to do something no one expected, something that would shock the entire council. Without a single word of anger or threat, the humans stood, one by one, their movements calm and precise, as if they were performing a ritual of decision. Their chairs scraped softly against the floor, a quiet sound that echoed more than any shouting could have. Heads turned in surprise. Whispers rippled through the chamber. Some aliens froze in disbelief. Others gasped, because humans never walked out of negotiations. It was unheard of. A move that meant they were serious, a move that hinted at consequences far greater than anyone dared imagine. The humans did not shout. They did not slam doors. They did not wave their hands in dramatic protest. They simply gathered their tablets, notes, and documents, their faces still composed, showing no sign of anger, only calm determination. As they moved toward the exit, the room seemed to shrink around them, all eyes fixed on the human delegation. The tension thickened like an electric charge. No one dared move. No one dared speak. The silence was deafening, because everyone understood the gravity of this action, this quiet, deliberate walk away. The door remained closed for a few seconds longer than expected, giving the impression that even the chamber itself paused to take a breath. And then, with a soft click that sounded louder than thunder, the humans stepped out, leaving the seats empty, leaving the tablets behind on some tables, leaving the room with nothing but the echo of their calm authority. The council members looked at each other in panic, trying to process what had just happened, some frantically reaching for communications to send urgent messages to the humans' embassy, others staring, frozen, unable to believe their eyes. The effect on the council was immediate and devastating. The moment the humans walked out, all control seemed to vanish. Delegations who had argued moments ago now looked around in confusion and fear. Alliances faltered, whispering turned into shouting. And the chamber that had been a controlled environment for centuries seemed to collapse under the weight of panic. The humans had always been the stabilizing force, the quiet balance that prevented chaos from erupting in meetings like this. And now, with them gone, the realization hit every delegate hard. The humans were not bluffing, and the consequences of ignoring them could be catastrophic. Some smaller species began frantic calculations, whispering urgently to their allies, trying to predict what humans might do next. Others began writing apology messages, promises of compromise, and assurances of cooperation, trying to lure the humans back. But the humans were already gone, their presence replaced by a powerful emptiness, a void that amplified every insecurity, every fear, every mistake that had been made during the negotiation. The council chairman pounded his staff, calling for calm, but his voice sounded weak compared to the invisible weight of the humans' absence. Even the rival factions, previously confident in their positions, now felt exposed, vulnerable, and afraid. The arrogance that had filled their speeches moments ago now seemed like foolishness, because the humans' walkout, while was more than a protest, it was a clear signal that the patience of humanity had limits, limits that no one had considered. The shock spread like wildfire, and suddenly, the meeting room, once filled with anger and rivalry, was now consumed with fear, uncertainty, and a desperate need to regain control. Outside the chamber, the humans moved with the same calm precision as inside, their expressions unreadable, their purpose clear. They were making a statement, one that no threats, accusations, or power could undo. They were showing the galaxy that diplomacy had rules, and that respect and logic were not optional. The message was simple, powerful, and unforgettable. Ignore reason, ignore humanity's guidance, and the consequences would not be just words. They would be real, immediate, and unavoidable. The Council would never forget this moment. The quiet authority of humans leaving the room. The moment the humans left the chamber, panic spread like wildfire through the Council. Delegates who had moments ago been arguing fiercely now froze in fear, whispering urgently to one another, trying to understand what had just happened. Humans never left negotiations, not without reason, and the sudden departure signaled something serious, something none of them wanted to face. The air felt heavy, charged with anxiety. The usual confident posture of several alien leaders disappeared, replaced by hurried movements and nervous glances. The balance that had kept the meeting from collapsing completely was gone, and the Council felt it immediately. Some of the larger factions began calling for security updates, their translators buzzing furiously as messages were sent across the galaxy, their faces pale, their eyes darting around the room. Because everyone knew that when humans acted decisively, consequences followed. Stories of past interventions flashed in the minds of delegates. Tales of planets that had been saved or destroyed because humans chose to act. The history was clear. Humans were not just diplomats. They were a force to be reckoned with, a fact that filled the Council members with equal parts respect and fear. Smaller species whispered among themselves, calculating what this could mean for their worlds, trying to prepare for the worst. Some sent frantic messages begging for guidance. Others tried to negotiate with the rival blocs, hoping to keep the situation from exploding entirely. The chaos was visible everywhere. Scales trembling, claws fidgeting, wings flapping nervously. The room that had once been filled with measured debate now resembled a storm created by the absence of humans, who had always been the calm in the center, the stabilizing presence that no one realized they depended on until now. The Council chairman attempted to restore order, raising his voice above the murmurs, pounding his staff on the floor, calling for calm, but his authority seemed fragile compared to the invisible weight left by the humans' departure. Factions that had been confident moments ago now looked unsure, some openly quivering, others muttering apologies to one another, afraid that any misstep could provoke the humans further. The realization that the humans' patience had limits spread quickly, and it changed the entire tone of the meeting, from one of negotiation to one of desperate fear. Rival factions who had insulted the humans, dismissed their warnings, or ignored their suggestions now whispered urgently. Some trying to revise their positions, others drafting messages to beg for their return. The tension was almost unbearable, the room vibrating with panic, and no one dared move too quickly, because every delegate knew that humans acted based on principle, and when principle demanded action, there was no stopping them. It was not just diplomacy, it was the promise of consequences, real and unavoidable. And the fear of that reality gripped every species present. Even those who had been quietly observing, hoping the humans would remain neutral, now realized they had underestimated the humans' influence. The absence created a vacuum of authority, and suddenly every decision, every word, every gesture became critical. Missteps could ignite old rivalries, provoke misunderstandings, and lead to the very conflict the Council had been trying to prevent. The humans' quiet departure forced everyone to confront their own arrogance, their own pride, and their own responsibility for maintaining peace. And that awareness only added to the fear. Emergency transmissions began circulating. Teams rushed to the human embassy, sending messages filled with apologies, promises, and pleas. But the humans did not respond immediately, their silence only deepening the panic. The council began to realize that they were not dealing with empty threats. Humans were serious, and the absence of immediate communication made the room feel even more tense. The balance of power had shifted, and it was clear that the humans now controlled the situation without being present. As the panic continued, delegates began to quietly assess what would happen if the humans did not return. Some imagined war breaking out, fleets mobilizing, planets in danger, while others hoped the humans would come back once the factions proved they could act responsibly. But no one was certain, and that uncertainty fueled the chaos. Whispers turned into frantic discussions. Eyes darted from one leader to another, alliances wavered, and the chamber was consumed by the understanding that humans were not just participants in this negotiation. They were the force keeping the galaxy from descending into disaster. Every species, large or small, understood one undeniable truth. Humans had the power to change everything, and their departure was the most serious message anyone could ever receive. The panic was not just fear of losing control. It was fear of humans' judgment, and the weight of that fear hung over the chamber like a storm, forcing every delegate to reconsider their positions, rethink their strategies, and hope desperately that they could act wisely before the humans decided that patience had run out entirely. Within minutes of the humans' quiet exit, the entire council seemed to collapse under the weight of uncertainty and fear. The moment they left, the fragile alliances that had held together for centuries began to crumble. Delegates who had been confident moments ago now looked unsure, whispering anxiously to one another, questioning every decision they had made. Some tried to rally their factions, calling for calm, but their voices trembled, betraying the panic that had spread faster than any words could contain. It became clear that the humans were the only force keeping order, and without them, chaos threatened to overtake the chamber. Leaders who had previously dismissed human warnings now realized their arrogance had been a dangerous mistake. Their pride gave way to fear. Their gestures became uncertain, and the room filled with nervous movements, taps on tables, flickers of holographic displays, and hurried gestures. Smaller species observed the unfolding chaos, calculating how quickly they could react to protect their worlds, while mid-sized factions sent urgent messages to allies outside the chamber, begging for advice, hoping for guidance, anything to bring back the humans or stabilize the situation before it spiraled further. The council chairman, who had maintained composure for decades, suddenly found his authority challenged. He raised his staff, tried to call for order, but the shouting, whispering, and panicked movements drowned out his voice. The humans had left, yet their presence was felt more strongly than ever, as delegates realized that without human oversight, the council's influence was fragile. Every argument, every disagreement threatened to explode into full-blown conflict. The chamber no longer felt like a place of negotiation. It felt like a pressure cooker, ready to burst at the smallest spark. Some of the rival factions, who had been confident and dismissive of the humans' role in diplomacy, now acted desperately, sending frantic messages filled with apologies, promises, and pledges to compromise. They understood too late that the humans' walkout was not a threat to be ignored. It was a signal, a warning that consequences would follow if they did not act responsibly. The atmosphere was thick with tension, every species aware that any mistake could have disastrous repercussions. The panic spread not just through fear of conflict, but fear of the humans' judgment, which could be far more decisive than any weapon. Alliances that had seemed stable moments ago began to wobble. Delegations whispered privately, recalculating strategies, reconsidering loyalties. Some openly questioned their leaders, wondering if their decisions had provoked the humans' departure. The council that had always projected power and unity now revealed the fragile nature of its control. Every delegate could see it, feel it, and understand that human patience had limits, and those limits had been tested. The chamber had transformed from a room of confident diplomacy into a chaotic arena of anxiety and uncertainty. The panic also exposed hidden rivalries. Old grudges resurfaced as delegates argued over who was to blame for the humans' departure. Accusations flew, tempers flared, and every movement was scrutinized. Each species became hyper-aware of the risks in every decision, fearing that any misstep could provoke consequences from the humans they could not control. The council had become a place where logic and order gave way to fear and speculation. And delegates realized that until humans returned, their room of negotiation was no longer functional. It was a battlefield of nerves and mistrust. Emergency teams began scrambling, some attempting to send emissaries to the human delegation, hoping to negotiate a return, others sending desperate pleas, trying to show that they understood the humans' concerns and were willing to act responsibly. The panic was contagious, spreading even to those species that had not been directly involved in the conflict. The entire chamber vibrated with tension, every delegate's thoughts racing, imagining the worst. Fearing the collapse of the council entirely, knowing that the humans' presence had been the only force preventing disaster. Even the council's security personnel were on edge, hovering drones and monitors tracking every gesture, every pulse of nervous energy in the room. The humans' absence had shifted the balance, and it was clear to all that no technology or authority could replace them. Every species now recognized that the humans were the true stabilizers, the invisible backbone of the council, and without them, the risk of panic and uncontrolled conflict was greater than anyone had ever realized. By the time the emergency communications had been sent, and every delegation had expressed worry or submitted pleas, the room remained tense, the panic unbroken, every member aware that they were witnessing a rare, terrifying moment. The galaxy's most powerful diplomats had lost their calm because the humans had walked out. The council's entire structure seemed shaken to its core. The delegates could only hope that humanity would return before the chaos became irreversible. The humans' quiet absence had taught a lesson that no words or threats ever could. And the room was left with the weight of that lesson, heavy, urgent, and unforgettable. Desperate to prevent total collapse, teams from every delegation rushed to the human embassy, sending urgent messages filled with apologies, promises, and pledges to act responsibly. The humans' sudden departure had created a vacuum of authority, and every species realized that nothing would move forward without their guidance. Diplomats typed furiously, sending transmissions across multiple channels, their words pleading for attention, hoping to convince the humans that the factions were finally willing to negotiate with reason. The chamber's panic had spread so quickly that even those who had opposed human influence now feared the consequences of ignoring them. Inside the embassy, the human delegation received the incoming messages calmly. Scanning each communication with precision, their faces remained neutral, their expressions unreadable. Yet there was a quiet intensity in their eyes. Every word, every plea, every promise from the council members was noted, analyzed, and measured. They understood that the galaxy's leaders were finally realizing the weight of their actions, that the balance of peace rested entirely on whether they could accept guidance. The humans had given them one last chance, and the choice now rested entirely with the council. Outside the embassy, the atmosphere in the council chamber remained chaotic. Factions whispered urgently to one another, trying to coordinate, strategize, and convince each other to act responsibly. Some sent messengers, hoping that direct communication would persuade the humans to return. Others prepared contingency plans, unsure if humans would forgive arrogance and dismissal. The tension was thick enough to touch. Every movement, every gesture, every glance carried meaning, because the humans' response would determine the next steps. The room was alive with anxiety, and every delegate understood the stakes. The human delegation, though silent, projected a presence that dominated the entire council even from afar. Their reputation for decisive action, fairness, and intelligence was enough to make factions tremble. Smaller species whispered their fears, mid-sized species calculated probabilities of conflict, and the rival blocs considered carefully every decision before acting. Humans had become the invisible rulers of the negotiation, controlling outcomes without stepping into the chamber. Their absence was more powerful than any speech or threat, and every delegate understood that the humans' patience had limits that were now being tested. Messages kept arriving, each one trying to convince the humans that the council would finally act reasonably. The delegates offered concessions, reassurances, and promises never made before. Many admitted past mistakes, others begged for guidance, hoping that humanity's influence would return order before disaster struck. The humans read all of it, weighing sincerity against fear, noting which species acted out of respect and which acted out of panic. Their decisions would shape the future of the negotiations, because once they responded, the Council would know whether it still had a chance to maintain peace. Within the chamber, delegates waited anxiously for any sign of the humans' response. Conversations dropped into tense silence whenever a transmission arrived. Heads tilted toward monitors, eyes widened, whispers ceased. As the realization set in that humans could return at any moment, and that moment would decide the direction of the galaxy, the panic had shifted into a desperate hope. Factions now considered the humans' guidance more valuable than their own pride. Leaders who had been arrogant only hours before now felt humility, their egos subdued by the quiet, patient authority of humanity. The humans finally responded with a single clear message. If you want peace, act like it. We're not babysitters. The words were simple, concise, but carried immense power. Every delegate understood that this was both a warning and an opportunity, a test of wisdom and responsibility. The Council realized that the humans were not there to force solutions. They were there to give one last chance for reason and fairness to prevail. The message itself silenced the chaos, leaving delegates to consider their next moves carefully. The weight of the humans' authority hung in the air, palpable, undeniable, and completely transformative. Immediately, factions began to act differently. Discussions became measured, voices lowered, and gestures softened. Delegates began negotiating with care, finally taking the human warning seriously. Their decisions now guided by the realization that ignoring humans would be disastrous. The panic remained, but it had transformed into cautious hope, and every species understood that the humans were giving them control, responsibility, and the final opportunity to resolve their disputes without war. The entire council had learned a lesson in humility, patience, and respect, one that would remain unforgettable. The human delegation, though still physically absent from the chamber, now controlled the pace, direction, and tone of the negotiations. Their message had forced every species to reconsider their actions, to measure every word, and to act with a responsibility they had avoided before. The council slowly began to stabilize, driven not by threats, weapons, or orders, but by the quiet, undeniable authority of humanity. And in that moment, it became clear that humans had never been just diplomats. They had been the ultimate guardians of peace, providing guidance without force and teaching the galaxy that true power often lay in patience, presence, and principle. The factions finally began to negotiate seriously, guided by the quiet warning humans had left behind. For the first time in hours, every delegate spoke with care, measured their words, and considered the consequences of every decision. The chamber was still tense, but the chaos had begun to subside. Rival blocs no longer shouted or interrupted. They listened, debated, and compromised, understanding that this was their last opportunity to act responsibly. The humans had left the power of choice entirely in their hands, and the council knew that failure was no longer an option. As negotiations continued, the smaller species watched nervously, waiting for signs of success or failure. Every action taken now could shape the future of the galaxy. Alliances formed and broke, compromises were made, and delegates who had once been arrogant began to admit mistakes, apologize, and offer concessions. It was a delicate dance, a careful balance between pride and survival, and every participant understood that the humans' earlier intervention had created the conditions for this rare moment of reason. The room seemed to breathe with a cautious optimism that had been impossible before. The human delegation, although absent physically, remained the invisible center of attention. Their earlier message, simple yet powerful, hung over the room like a quiet force, reminding everyone that peace was possible, but only if they acted wisely. Delegates kept glancing at their communications devices, hoping for some further guidance, but the humans remained silent, letting the factions take responsibility. Their strategy was clear. They would not intervene unless necessary. Their presence felt strongest in their absence, shaping every decision, every gesture, and every compromise. Hours passed, and gradually the factions began to reach an agreement. Small concessions turned into larger compromises. Positions once considered non-negotiable were adjusted. The atmosphere shifted from fear to cautious relief. Whispers of understanding replaced the frantic murmurs of panic. It was not a perfect solution, But it was a start, a demonstration that when left with responsibility, the factions could act reasonably. The human strategy had worked, proving that their greatest power was not military might, but the ability to create conditions where others could choose peace willingly. When the agreement was finally announced, the council chamber erupted in a mixture of relief and astonishment. Delegates shook hands, exchanged nods of respect, and even rival leaders smiled faintly, knowing that disaster had been averted by their own careful actions, guided by the invisible hand of the humans, outside observers. Smaller species and allied worlds began to breathe easier. News of the peaceful agreement spread quickly, and everyone understood that the humans had returned, if only in spirit, to restore stability to the galaxy without firing a single weapon or issuing a single threat. The humans returned to the chamber quietly, their expressions calm, unreadable, and composed, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But every delegate knew that something extraordinary had indeed occurred. The presence of humans reminded everyone of their unique role, not as enforcers of power, but as guardians of reason. Their calm authority had taught a lesson more powerful than any speech or battle could have delivered. The galaxy had learned that humanity's influence was measured not by fear, but by trust and responsibility, and that lesson would not be forgotten. Some delegates approached the human representatives with respect, offering thanks, apologies, and gestures of reconciliation. Others simply bowed or nodded, acknowledging the authority that humans carried without even trying to dominate. The humans accepted nothing with arrogance, only a quiet recognition of the efforts made. Their return restored the balance that had been temporarily lost, and the council felt its stability renewed, tempered now by humility and understanding, a sense that decisions carried weight and consequences, and that humans would always be a standard by which reason was measured. The peaceful agreement held, the rival blocs withdrew their threats, and the council celebrated cautiously, knowing that while challenges remained, the galaxy had survived a moment of near disaster. The humans' actions had proven once again that true power lay in guidance, patience, and principle, not in dominance or violence. Delegates reflected on the lessons learned, understanding that the humans had never needed to act aggressively to control outcomes. Their presence and wisdom had been enough. The council had been reminded that humanity's role was vital, their quiet authority shaping history in a way no weapon or fleet ever could. In the end, the humans returned to their seats with calm expressions, their presence a reminder that the galaxy's future could be steered not by force, but by courage, wisdom, and the ability to demand responsibility from others. The Council learned that humanity's greatest power was the stability it brought, simply by being willing to act and being willing to leave if reason failed. The lesson was unforgettable. The peace was hard-earned, and the galaxy had witnessed once again that humans were not just participants, but the guardians of balance, patience, and hope